Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's session. We're going to give it another minute or so just to allow a few people to join, and then we will get started. So thanks for your patience. Okay, I think we will kick things off. So good afternoon, everyone, and happy Friday. Thanks for joining what's now the 13th in the series of workshops hosted by Social Impact Hub as part of the RISE program, a program that's supporting the social sector and social enterprise sector and kindly supported by Westpac Foundation and Paul Ramsey Foundation. My name's Rob, and alongside my colleague Jess Liang and the broader social impact team, it's been a real pleasure to put together this series of workshops to support the sector, and thank you for all being a part of that with us. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. For me, that's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, as well as extending this more broadly, acknowledging that we're all dialing in from different locations today, and just acknowledging as well that many of us are in lockdown. It's a difficult time, so thank you for being here, and hopefully we can make this a interactive and collaborative session. I'd also like to wish everyone a happy Wear It Purple today. For those who aren't aware, today is a day to raise awareness around LGBTQIA+, especially for young people based in Australia. So I'm just wearing purple to acknowledge that. Before we dive in, just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm sure we're all pretty used to this now on calls. If you're not speaking, please just keep yourself on mute just so we can kind of control noise on the call. If you do have a question or comment, please make use of the chat function, and we'll do our best to answer these as we go through or at a suitable time in the session. We're also going to have some time for Q&A at the end of the session as well, so I hope we'll be able to get through everyone's questions. Please turn on your camera if you can, just so we can make this session as interactive as possible. Any technical challenges, either just send myself or Jess Liang a private message. We'll do our best to help support you, but just to note, the session is being recorded, so if you're having connection challenges, hopefully you can catch up post-session. That's everything from me. My absolute pleasure to introduce you to today's facilitators. We have Joanne from Westpac and Olivia from Social Traders, who'll be taking us through today's session on social procurement. So thank you both for being here today and supporting this set of workshops. And I will hand over to you, Joanne. Welcome.
Hi everybody, I'm just going to do the magic sharing screen thing and I hope that it works. I've practiced it several times. It's been okay. Can you see my slides? Okay, awesome. So good afternoon everybody. I'm really excited to be here. I've worked in the procurement profession for over 20 years in several countries and several industries. I've been involved in the buying process for everything from tiny electronic components right through to multi-million-dollar construction services. My current role at Westpac is where I've taken all that experience to try and help organisations like yours navigate procurement in a large organisation. I really do believe that the power of procurement can drive positive social change in our society, and I want to do what I can to help with that. So first of all, just a bit of a disclaimer. The information I'm going to provide today is of a general nature and is really just based on my experience. The intent is to help you understand the procurement process within large corporations. It'll also not guarantee you work with Westpac or any large organisations, but it should help you understand how things work and maybe why things take a bit of time to happen. Also, I'm not a business development expert, but I will provide you with some tips on what you can do to increase your chances of finding out about opportunities to supply with large organisations. So a bit of context next. Generally, large companies want to deal with mature, experienced suppliers when subcontracting out services or buying large volumes of products. Buying goods or services from another company can be a risky process. After all, you're basically trusting another company to do something for you. And when you do that, you have less control, or you feel like you have less control, even if another company might be able to do that thing better than you. Has anybody heard of the make-buy decision? I can't see everybody, but it'd be good to know if anybody's heard of that. Well, if you haven't heard of that, what it is where a company decides the thing that it needs to do, whether it decides to do it internally or whether it goes out to an external company to do that thing. This is where the procurement team come in. Basically, companies look for suppliers that have the ability to provide products and services which meet these key requirements. The availability, basically where they want it, when they want it, and the volume that they want it at. Cost, for the price that they're willing to pay for it. Quality for the standard, quality for the standard that they need that goods or services provided for, and bringing in some innovation where a supplier has a better idea about doing it than they do. Now, companies find out whether another company can do this through asking questions such as, can your business handle the volume of work that they're looking to contract for? Does the business have the relevant experience to do the work? Are you able to supply the goods and services to the network of sites managed by the business, if that's applicable? And what differentiates your product compared to your competitors? And remember that to many, having a social impact may or may not be a differentiator when you're part of that tender process. Has anybody heard of the terms procurement and purchasing and wondered what the difference is? Yeah, it's a term that's kind of thrown around. Well, the difference is that procurement is a strategic activity, and it's usually applicable to high value procurement spend, should I say, buying things. And when I say high, it's relative to that company, and or whether the risk of supplying that thing is high. Purchasing is a more tactical process where someone in the business buys something that it needs, just kind of usually like as a one-off, and it usually occurs when the value and or the risk is relatively low. A really good example of this is to think about the difference between people in your organization buying a pen from the local shop, and then somebody going out and agreeing a contract to provide stationery to your staff through a catalogue. To work out which catalogue is best for you, someone would have to run through a version of the procurement process to kind of work that out. Many organisations also have thresholds between what procurement and what is purchasing in their organisation. For example, it could be that people in the business can buy what they need for anything below $20,000. They can just go out, get one quote and bring it in. However, a procurement process of some form may need to happen above $20,000. And it really, really does depend on the organisation. The likelihood that the higher the spend and complexity of what you're supplying, the more involved that this procurement process will be. Consideration may also be given to what's called high risk supply. So if something is low cost and maybe even comes below that example $20,000 threshold that I mentioned, but really important to running the business, then it may have to go through a detailed procurement process. I once worked for a company where most things came through the procurement team. We didn't run a tender process for low value items, but we certainly did a procurement process and paid attention to what was being bought and made sure the terms and conditions were in place. In this example, we were sending people up to Papua New Guinea, and the risk of something going wrong to them was high, and the consequence of that was high. They would get injured, or the site they were going to was dangerous. So we just needed to make sure that everything was closed off there. Now, just a tip here, if what you supply is low value, and I mean that in the context of the company that you're selling to, not the company, your company. and you're having trouble finding a company to buy that, it's worth considering looking at intermediaries. For example, if you cannot provide services to that large company, perhaps it would be better to subcontract to an organisation that can. Most of these large organisations will actually subcontract out their services. Does anybody have any questions on that?
So you're suggesting there a consortium approach of, pooling the expertise and resources to be a more significant contender for these contracts?
Actually, that wasn't what I was suggesting, but Chloe, that actually is something I probably should have suggested. Yeah, there is opportunities to get together with other organisations. Just need to make sure that you understand how the arrangements work, and who's going to be in charge and how you're going to make decisions around that. Does that help?
Yeah, because I'm interested. I don't know if that's a segue from what you were going to be covering. Because I know that was one.
No, it's not, but it's a good one. I was a bit deeper than I was going to go, but happy to chat about it.
Yeah, great. So I remember there was one instance where we didn't have that governance formalised, and we were putting in a joint tender, and then in the end they took the whole thing, and I got squeezed out. So it's about really looking at how to protect your interests in that when you've invested resources in. But basically, if I hadn't have been involved, they wouldn't have got it. So how would you? What process around that?
It is worth making sure that you do have a clear governance structure and structure involved, so that when you present that potentially novel idea to these large organizations, you've thought about all of those things, and they can go, yeah, that's great, let's do that. But again, all companies are different. Some are a little bit more sort of open to that concept, and some for others it might be super new, and they might just go, oh, this sounds too complicated and risky, and I'm just going to go with who I know. If you're thinking of doing that kind of arrangement, my tip is to kind of talk early to them and get advice to understand if there's appetite for it. That way you don't hopefully don't waste your time. Or you could be creating something that's just amazing. Have I answered your question, Chloe?
Yes, thank you.
Brilliant, excellent. Okie dokie. All right, I'm now going to take you through what is the standard procurement process that most corporates use. Each one might be slightly different in the details, particularly to where approvals happen in each step. This is an example that Westpac has in our supplier playbook, which is available on our website. And this shows it as a cycle, but it could be a linear process depending on what is being bought. And what I mean by that is if it's operational spend, as in spend that like for example, cleaning services, they always need it, it's going to continue on for years and years what it is they're supplying, then it will be a cycle. But if it's for a project, there will be a start, a middle, and an end. And bear in mind that the cycle can run for years. Many companies agree arrangements with its suppliers for 3 to 5 years. And the reason for this is that tendering can take up a lot of time and resources for the buying organisation. Plus, it's desirable for a supplier to have a longer contract, so they are more likely to provide competitive terms. So the process I'm going to talk to you today generally starts with the company approaching a selected list of suppliers. So how do you make sure that you're on that list? As I said, I'm not a business development expert, but I'm just going to share a few tips, and Olivia will have some more tips in her part of the presentation. How do you get noticed? Work out what their determination is for buying from your company. Work out what that could be. Do some research. Look at what it is the company buys. Do they want what you're selling? Look at their website. What information is there? And when it comes to driving social outcomes, have a look at their sustainability pages on their website, or if they talk about buying from social enterprises. Don't be afraid to use that channel to get noticed. part of my role in my organisation is to advocate for your organisations, but I can't do that if I don't know you're there. If there isn't a social procurement rep in an organisation, consider contacting the head of procurement, ask for, and you can find them on LinkedIn usually. LinkedIn is just such a brilliant resource now for sales, I reckon. You might want to ask for a referral from somebody you do know, either in that particular organisation or another procurement person in another organisation. But procurement people are actually really well networked. And the number of times that I've referred organisations on to other organisations, it's been quite a lot. And don't always focus on aiming for the person with the purse strings. Often they're the ones that are really busy managing existing suppliers. I don't have any money to spend, but I can help you get noticed if I believe you're ready to supply to us, and I can make sure that this happens at the right time. The trouble with talking to somebody halfway through a contract is that they'll probably put you in a file somewhere, and when they're ready to go out to the market again, they may have forgotten about you. I can also help stop you waste your time. So if there isn't an opportunity, I can let you know. And also bear in mind that the person with the purse strings probably does get an awful lot of cold calls from an awful lot of suppliers. My next tip is to get certified. If you're a social enterprise, or if there's any other types of suppliers out there, if you're a women-owned business or a B Corp, the Social Traders database is now public. Just make sure that your profile is up to date so people can find you and know what it is you do. Social Traders also hold networking events for their members, and they'll invite buyers to meet members selling what it is that they want. I've met quite a few suppliers through that channel. Register as a potential supplier on the company's website. Perhaps there's a supplier portal on there or page that talks about information of suppliers. There may be a contact email or registration page that you can use. And please do not understand the power of a good website. Olivia will talk about branding, but know that often procurement people use Google to find suppliers. So make sure it's easy to find what it is that you sell on your website, what it is, where you sell it, and what kind of customers you sell to. Don't have it buried down at some tab somewhere that they have to go searching. It should be really obvious. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, cool, thank you. So before I head to talk about the market engagement process, I just want to run you through a few of the terms that are used here. If you've ever heard the term RFX and wondered what it means, it actually means request for something. So even though it doesn't necessarily come into this one, it could mean expression of interest, request for information, request for quotation, request for proposal, and a request for tender, invitation to tender. Basically, these are all about looking at the market and finding out what it is and who can supply. And they might start off with an EOI process. For example, if there's 30 suppliers and they're like, oh, there's 30 suppliers, but I'm not sure which ones can meet it. And they don't want to run a tender process for more than a handful of suppliers because the tender process can take a lot of time. So it's like a filtering process where you might receive an EOI, they're just checking that you can meet their requirements early on. So essentially, as we progress through these definitions, the more involved it is and the more information that you might need to provide to go to the market. There's no strict definition of all of these, but that's just a good way of thinking about it. There is such a thing as open tenders. It's a little bit old-fashioned. We don't really do it anymore. Maybe some governments do it. But these are becoming less and less common now, just because they can be very time-consuming, having to go through maybe 100 suppliers and work out which ones you want to do business with or want to invite to a tender. The first stage of this market engagement process is that this RFX that I mentioned is sent out to the market. Now, many companies use e-procurement systems to send this information out to their supplier. You may have heard of Cooper or Reba. These are e-procurement systems. Essentially, they're a workflow system which captures each step of the procurement process and can capture internal approvals as well. Depending on how the company is set up with these systems, you may need to register with the e-procurement supplier, or you may just receive an email from the e-procurement system. Often it's branded by that potential customer. If you're not sure how to use these systems, ask your client. They understand that these systems are quite new and they should provide information on how to use them. And sometimes there's information available on their website. Just out of interest, has anybody used these systems before? I can see some nodding. I can't see everybody's faces, so if anybody wants to shout out, I'm happy to, but okay, cool. So, I mean, sometimes these RFPs or RFXs are sent out the old-fashioned way by email. So that's another channel. I'm not sure if anybody still uses mail. There's probably some little government office somewhere that still insists on sending things out in mail, but I'm not aware of any of those. Once you receive the documentation, you'll then need to work on preparing a response. Whichever way you receive this documentation, the first thing you should do is open it and read the instructions. This will explain how you respond and when. Plus, you will often need to acknowledge receipt of the documentation. Make sure you do that. Read the instructions and the questions and make sure you then understand what the questions are being asked. If you don't understand, ask for clarification, because it likely is if you don't understand, somebody else doesn't understand either. But also check to see if there's a last date for questions date, which may be a few days before the tender closes. So don't get caught out by this. And remember, if you ask a question, it's likely that the buying company will send that answer out to all people taking part in the tender. And the reason for this is so that everybody has the same information when they're submitting their response. And this will unlikely happen if there's something confidential about your company. They'll probably come straight back to you, but otherwise they generally like to respond to everybody with the answer. Often they'll like hide the name of the person that's asking it and then the response. So there's a few tips that I've got here that some of my procurement team particularly wanted me to share. Now, make sure you answer all the questions, all of them. If you don't answer all the questions, you risk rendering your proposal non-compliant or reducing your evaluation score. Make sure you provide comprehensive answers, because this helps the evaluators have enough information to score you appropriately. And please make sure you check your spelling and formatting. Bad spelling and formatting can be a massive distraction for people reviewing the tenders and can reflect poorly on your response. And like I said, make sure you respond before the deadline. Do not forget, even aim for like a couple of days beforehand. It's really super important. If you need an extension of time, ask for it. Absolutely. Don't be afraid to go back and say, look, I need some extra time. You may get it, you may not get it, but won't be any worse than you are if you didn't ask. The other thing here is consider engaging external support to help you if you haven't run through these tender processes before. You'll be up against companies that have professional bid writing teams. These people externally, I don't know anybody in particular, and Olivia might, they will help you run your tender because it will take a lot longer than you think. And then understand the types of questions being asked. Is there a heavy emphasis on social impact?
It is.
If not, relying on this as your winning formula might be a mistake. You're probably there because of what you do, but you still need to be able to deliver goods and services in the most efficient and effective way. And oh, sorry, I said finally before. Finally, if you object to anything in the terms and conditions of the contract, don't just accept it. Go back with your alternative position on that or a clarification request on what that terms and conditions mean. And then you'll submit your response. So as mentioned, make sure you do that by the date. Don't leave it to the last minute in case you have any technical issues. But if you do have technical issues, again, don't be afraid to ask for help from that company. Now, once all those submissions are received, a team of people will usually evaluate the responses. This process will likely involve a team of specialists, for example, legal, technical, commercial, financial, a selection of users to mark different parts of the tender. And they're often providing with a scoring system like 1 to 10, 1 to 5, and then guidance on how to respond to that tender. And this helps drive consistency across the scoring. Some of the answers, some of the themes in the tender may be weighted depending on their importance to the buyer. For example, on-time delivery may be very important to others. Low cost may be important to some. This system may or may not be shared with you. It really does depend on the company. If it's not shared, don't be afraid to ask though. The worst thing that can happen is they say no. And then what happens is that this process helps shortlist suppliers who might be taken to the next stage, or we might then say we've gone through the EOI process, you might then go back to the beginning and go through a further tendering process. Now, in parallel to that, I've put up supplier due diligence. Background checks may be taken on your organisation. So, for example, financial background checks or checks for any references that you've required. All these things that go into this help add some assurance that you are a solid organisation that will be able to supply to you. And if there are any risks identified, there may be a plan worked out to how to reduce the chances of those things happening. So don't be frightened if you feel like, oh, maybe I'm not as solid as something else, or maybe there's something going on there. This is where kind of a risk assessment is carried out, and sometimes there's things that can be done in order to help make sure that you can supply to the company. Now, this may or may not happen. The supplier presentations may or may not happen. If this does occur though, and you're asked to come and present, and sometimes this could be virtual now, my advice here is just to make sure you have people that can answer the questions in the proposal, because this is where they'll be answering further questions to grill you on what it is that you're proposing. And then maybe another shortlisting process will take place. And then there may be some negotiations around your price and terms and conditions. Now, this may or may not happen, but sometimes there may, like if you've given exceptions to some of the terms and conditions, there'll be discussions around those. My advice around this is if you are involved in complex contract negotiations, I recommend that you get a legal advice. As small changes in wording in some clauses can have a huge impact. I believe that there's some law firms out there that will offer social enterprises free or low-cost legal advice. So don't be shy in finding and looking for those and asking for that help. The contract is very important as it allows both parties to fully understand their obligations and the key success criteria as part of the relationship. The next step is agreement of the contract. Just make sure that you check everything that's in the contract and is in accordance with what you think that you've agreed. It's rare, but it's not unheard of for mistakes to be made when a company finalizes a contract. My advice here is to keep good record keeping during the contract negotiation, keep it in writing. If you've had discussions over the phone, take notes and sort of send them off to the other party, say, this is my understanding. So that if mistakes happen, you've got evidence that it was just a mistake. And make sure you understand if there's any key performance indicators in the contract, as this will be how your performance is managed during the contract. And at the same time in the background, and this is often can slow the finalisation of contracts, there'll be procurement people managing approvals within the organisation. Depending on the organisation, the value of the contract and the complexity, that might require more approvals. And sometimes this can take a really, really long time, like months and months. So don't be surprised if you don't hear anything for a while. But if you're wondering what's going on, call the procurement people and ask. And then the final step of this is the supplier debrief. So unsuccessful suppliers should certainly be contacted to let them know that they're not successful. But sometimes companies do forget to offer debriefing on that. If you are offered a debrief, as in why you weren't successful, take it. It's gold. It will help you understand what you need to do differently next time, or why you're not a good fit for that company. If you're not asked for a debrief, if you're not offered a debrief, just ask for it. Sometimes procurement people kind of move on to the next thing and they forget. So just absolutely go back to them and say, can you just let me know why? And if you are successful, it's okay to ask for a debrief as well. What was it that made you successful so that you can use that next time? I've done a lot of talking there. Does anybody have any questions on this kind of part of the process?
Joanne, it's Rob here. Not so much a question, but maybe an observation I was just keen to test with you. I think just throughout those 9 steps as you've been talking, I think a takeaway for me as someone who's been in the social enterprise and been, trying to secure or build relationships with larger organizations and enterprises, often feel like you're quite a small organization, and it's a one-way piece around you just follow the process of a large organization. But I think what I've been hearing from you at each step of the way is actually it's more about making it a two-way conversation. So questioning in every step, asking questions, don't be afraid to have that negotiation piece throughout.
Yeah.
Is that a kind of fair?
No, that's absolutely right. Sometimes procurement people can be juggling multiple tenders at the same time or dealing with other things. And it just kind of drops down their priority list. So just check in with them. What's happening? Can you let me know what the next stage is? Am I being successful? Yeah, absolutely. Just keep talking to them, and don't be shy in reminding them that you're a small business and this is really helpful for you to help you understand. Sometimes procurement people may sort of forget that it's a different world that they operate in than your sort of company. Is that helpful, Rob?
That's great. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay. So this is assuming that everything's gone great and you've now got a contract with a large business. What happens next? Well, first you're onboarded. What that means depends on what you're supplying, but it could involve a contractual kickoff meeting, which will further clarify how things will work during the relationship. It could be that you get a handover from an existing supplier. You might be given more information about the organisation, introduced to key stakeholders. Some of your team may need to be trained on health and safety requirements. There may be finalisation of reporting requirements, and there may be a regular meeting schedule established as well. The timescales of this process may be set out in the contract. It may not. Again, like you reminded, just ask if you're not sure what's happening. This part of the relationship is really like a marriage where communication and trust is really key. Sometimes things will go wrong, and the better relationship you have, the easier it is to kind of navigate through those situations. And things go wrong on both sides, the supplying organisation, and sometimes the large organisation may forget to send information through, send documentation through. Sometimes payments can get held up. Just kind of keep the dialogue open. And then everything should be good. During the during the life of the contract, there will be some ongoing monitoring by the company of the risks that they would have identified earlier on in the contracting process. So this is about making sure that all the mitigation measures that have been put in place are sort of still consistent. So, for example, if you're sending staff into an organisation, they need to make sure that there's somebody there to greet them. So they need to put like a risk mitigation in place as well. What happens if that person is not available? Okay, well, the mitigation is I'm going to have a phone number, I'm going to phone that, and is that phone number still valid? So when it comes to your organisation as a supplier, you might need to continue to provide information to the large corporate. So it could be around certification that you continue to hold. Often it's insurance certificates of currency to make sure you still have those insurances. Workers' compensation is a big one if you're providing people onto site, and business insurance. They might want to look at your business continuity plans and then really understand what's happening with your business to see if there's any issues which may affect your ability to deliver. A procurement person's worst nightmare is that they've entered into a contract with somebody that isn't able to supply. That is their number one thing, making sure that you are doing what you said you can do. If you do have any issues, it's really important to let the company know, let the buying company know that there's a problem or there's a potential problem so you can work through it. Sometimes there's things that they can do. I mean, you can just only imagine how COVID has impacted a lot of large organizations recently. So there was a lot of time spent contacting the companies that were really critical to Westpac and making sure that they could still supply to us. And then if there was challenges, what we could do to help them. And the other thing that's going to happen is just monitoring your performance. So I think of this as like an employee really, but basically they want to make sure that what you're doing is that you're delivering the goods and services to the right time, to the right place, and to the right quality. There may be other key performance indicators that I mentioned earlier in this contract. So make sure you keep an eye on those because this is how your performance will be measured. And then you reach the end of the contract. And that could be 3 or 5 years after you started the arrangement with that large corporate. And at this point, 3 things generally happen, and that's assuming there's been no complications or terminations early on. And this is the contract ends. So what you're currently providing is no longer required in the current form. So there's really no more opportunity to supply that to the company. It could be that the company's renewed. The contract is renewed, and this is where the existing agreement might be extended. Maybe there'll be new pricing or changes to the scope and terms and conditions that will be agreed. So if you're the existing supplier, this is awesome. You have the best chance of retaining the work if you can agree terms and conditions for both of you. And then the other one where there's really is the best opportunity for a new supplier to get in there is that the goods and services are still required, but they may want to go out and test the market. Now, some organizations have to do this. So I think some governments have to, they'd have to go back to the market and some don't. So some will have contracts that run for 20 years, but some organizations will have to go back and find out who's out there. So my advice here is if you get told, oh, we've just entered a contract, ask them when the contract is due to expire. And that's why you can keep an eye on it and then get back in 6 to 12 months before that contract's to expire and start talking to them to see if you can be involved in that tender list. They may not tell you, but again, it doesn't hurt to ask. In summary, that's the procurement cycle. Starts with requesting to go to market, then there's a due diligence phase, then finalising the contract, negotiating terms and conditions, onboarding, management, supplier and risk, and then management of performance, and then working out what to do when the contract finishes. Does anybody have any questions on that? That's brilliant. Makes it sound like I've explained it really well.
Another question. It's Rob again.
No.
You mentioned a few tips on contract renewal, finding out when contracts are due for renewal. Are there other ways that you can maximise your chances of knowing when a good, when there could be opportunities for you with big companies, just beyond asking?
You could ask others, I guess, beyond asking them. This is all the research and the business development side, Rob. So it could be finding out who the existing supplier is and finding out, but beyond asking, I'm not sure. There may be some governments that do put their list. I think some government departments have to put their contracts on a public database, and then they do say the duration of that contract as well. You can usually, so if you've been involved in a tender and you know that those terms and conditions said that the contract's going to run for 3 years, pretty much know then in 3 years' time that they're likely to go back to the market as well. So that's sort of asking, but without actually asking. You've got the information in your possession, and then maybe ask like your competitors. You know, you did a bid for Westpac. What was the deal? What happened? Any idea when it goes back? It's just all about doing some research. But the government one, I'm pretty sure that the government does publish tenders on. Organisations like ours wouldn't do that at the moment. Who knows? Things might change, and that's not a comment that things do change, will change, but you never know.
Yeah, fantastic. And we've got a question from Cameron who's asking, what can the benefits or potential issues be of using an intermediary or managed services company to be the lead social procurement contractor?
Benefits. The benefits are that you use their experience and you use their resources in order to navigate, because dealing with large companies, I describe it as like climbing Everest. You can get to the top and it could be amazing, but you could also die trying, and you could then die trying when you get there. So when you're using intermediaries, you're sort of spreading the risk around. Really super example, I think, is the stationery companies out there that exist. And if you're providing something that goes as a product that can be sold as office supplies, using those office supplies companies, they can help you with logistics and warehousing, so you can focus on what it is that you do. They also then provide you with access to other customers. So you're building relationships with other customers. I think that, yeah, there's certainly products that we have brought in through our office supply that they've been able to go out and supply to other customers through that arrangement. So those are the benefits. Did I answer your question, Cameron? Was there any, did I miss half of it?
I'm just trying to work out the benefits of using one, particularly in order to increase the chances of securing social procurement, rather than throwing the hat in the ring at the risk of being unsuccessful.
I think it's just really understanding what it is that the company wants from you and the size of supply. So I always think of the cleaning arrangement. If the company wants a nationwide supplier, many large companies just want to deal with one supplier. There will be some that are out there willing to carve out areas in order to sort of make it easy, but they see it as efficient dealing with one supplier. So if you're dealing with that sort of head intermediary, they can help bring you together and share their experience. And you could learn as well. It could be just a stepping stone in your progress of becoming, getting world domination, basically, but you're doing in little steps. And again, back to the Everest, don't go and climb Everest. Maybe go and climb like a little mountain first. And then that's why people have like Sherpas to help them climb Everest. They don't try and do everything themselves. They recognize their limitations, and then they recognize where they need help. And those intermediaries can often do that. And bear in mind that many of these large companies that do nationwide, as I mentioned, they may have to subcontract out to sort of more remote regions. So I think where there's social enterprises out there that are operating in the more remote regions, you may have the opportunity there to kind of say, hey, we've got this happening in here. Use us, talk to us. Have I answered that, Cameron?
Yeah, that's really good.
Thank you. So I'm going to quickly talk about social procurement. So that was it.
We've got another question. Incoming.
Sorry. Yeah, go.
I can wait, Joanne, but I was just going to ask whether you had any tips for social enterprises sort of to, get noticed or differentiate themselves during a formal procurement process, I guess, especially in organisations that may not be aware of, sort of purpose-driven organisations. Have you got any advice or tips?
Yeah, I mean, clearly let them know, but just be aware that it shouldn't be all of your offering. It shouldn't be your unique thing. I think it's definitely worth letting them know that it is what you do, because it's probably the icing on the cake there to say, look, we can do everything really great. And by the way, we've got these social outcomes. You also may not know who in the organization might be triggered by this as well. This is why it's really important to talk about what it is you do. The worst thing that, I think just be really conscious of being the first thing out of your mouth. It's really super that social enterprises are out there, but not everybody cares about it as much as you do. And I know that sounds really brutal. That does sound really brutal, but there's often a lot of things going in organizations which kind of go, oh, look, I really want to do it, but actually I've been told that I need to make sure I get this like for 10% lower and, tomorrow. And that's just kind of like, it's just like, let's just move on to somebody that is a little bit more open to that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Anything else, Jess, or should I just quickly talk about social procurement?
I think you're clear now.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So I just want to just quickly mention about social procurement. I know everybody probably knows about it. I just wanted to talk about what it is and the changes that I'm seeing in this space. Well, social procurement, as many of you know, is defined as the way organizations use their buying power for the greater good, recognizing that if they buy from certain organizations, they can drive social change. This may also include driving environmental outcomes, because after all, the state of the environment and the state of society are very much interlinked. This particular definition, and many of you are probably familiar with this, is from the Victorian government. Now, depending on the organisation, will often depend on the types of organisations that may be targeted in this definition. Within Westpac, we have currently identified 5 groups that we include in this definition, and that's certified social enterprises, Indigenous-owned businesses, Australian disability enterprises, women-owned businesses, and B corporations. There are other organisations which could be included in here, and bear in mind, in the US, they've got about 30 different minority groups that they focus on. We're just not quite there yet with the certification, but it could include LGBTQI organisations, veteran-owned organisations. I know there's at least one large corporate that's looking at veteran-owned, and small to medium enterprises, but also local enterprises as well. They may include those in their definitions. What I'm seeing is an ever-growing interest in social procurement. Many organisations up till now have really focused on Indigenous-owned businesses. This has been encouraged by the Australian government's Indigenous procurement policy. But I am increasingly seeing organisations focus on other sectors, such as social enterprises, particularly where they drive employment outcomes or even align to their philanthropic ideologies. I was talking to an organisation recently that does have a charity giving kind of cohort that they do, and they really want to look for organisations that align with that. So it's happening. Some just people at different stages of their journey. You're probably aware of the Victorian government social procurement framework, but are you aware what other states are doing? So are you aware that the Queensland procurement policy requires that departments, corporations and statutory bodies do business with ethically, environmentally and socially responsible suppliers? And they include a link to the social traders portal on its website. So don't be afraid to use this. Thank you. That was what I was going to talk about today. Does anybody have any questions before I hand over to Olivia? No, good, excellent. Well, Olivia's going to talk about how social traders can help you, plus provide some more tips based on her experience talking to large companies. We'll come back at the end as well for more Q&A, so it's not your only final chance. Thank you. Now let's just work out the technology. Cool.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jo. Hi, everyone. Is my screen clear for everybody? Great. All right, wonderful. Well, thanks very much. Really great to hear your piece, Jo. I always learn something new. It's really great to get your insights and your experience. Sorry, my slides aren't moving. Just give me a moment. There we go. Sorry about that. So my name's Olivia Cozzolino and I'm the Growth Services Manager at Social Traders. So the work that I do is focused on supporting certified social enterprises to grow through social procurement. And I do that through offering a range of training services, resources, one-to-one advisory services, and some consulting work as well. For people who aren't familiar with Social Traders, I'll just give you a brief overview of what we do. We're very excited. We've just launched a new brand a couple of weeks ago. So this is the first public presentation I'm giving with our new branding, which is very exciting. So we unlock business for good by leading the charge for social enterprise procurement. We've been around for 12 years now, but our work in the social procurement space really kicked off in 2016, and it's sort of in 2018 it became our sole focus. So we're really dedicated to pushing the social enterprise procurement movement forward. The way our model works, it's sort of three-pronged. So we certify and strengthen social enterprises, and we provide the only social enterprise certification in Australia. And the framework that we've developed is world leading in its depth and its adaptability. And the reason we started certification is because it's business and government wanted the confidence that social enterprises had been independently verified. And so more and more of them are confident in directing their procurement spend to social enterprises. We also provide a range of other services for social enterprises that help connect them to business and government customers, as well as building the critical skills and developing the strategies needed to sell to business and government customers. The second part of our model is that we enable business and government to create positive impact by deeply integrating social enterprises into their supply chains. So the way we do this is through our membership offer for business and government organisations, and through that we support them to build the systems, the structures, and to change internal culture so that they're ready and able to buy from social enterprises. And then the third part of our model is that we advocate for government policy to support social enterprise procurement. You know, government support and endorsement is a really crucial enabler of social enterprise procurement. And the three largest states in Australia, Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, that represent 76% of our population, they are all now members of Social Traders and they're buying from social enterprises, which is great. So since we first started connecting social enterprises with business and government buyers back in 2018, we've seen really rapid growth in the market. So what this graph shows you is that over the past 4 years, we've grown from having 212 certified social enterprises in our network to now having 445 and still growing. We started out with 30 business and government members and we've now got 115 and that's still growing. And the spend that's occurred between both sides of the market now totals $412 million over the 4 years. So pretty impressive growth. And what we're forecast, our vision 2030 over the next 10 years, is to keep growing these numbers and to get to a point where $5.5 billion in sales is flowing to the social enterprise sector from our business and government members, and obviously creating really significant impact in Australia. So now I'll share a little bit about some of our business and government members and some of the marketplace trends that we've observed. So this is just a tiny snapshot of some of our business and government members. Obviously Westpac is one of them and I believe was one of the founding members. We've worked very closely together over the years. This image gives you a bit of a breakdown of our members by industry. So you can see that 36% of our members are in the construction and infrastructure space, and that's largely because the government policy has mandated that social procurement be built into the major road and rail infrastructure projects that are happening up the eastern seaboard. 20% of our members are in state government. There's 9% in banking and finance. And then we've also got representation in logistics and transport, property, professional services, university sector, and technology. Now, this image shows you where social procurement spend is coming from. And the government, construction and infrastructure and property accounts for nearly 2/3 of the spend, but we are seeing other sectors emerging as well. So the highest spend areas that we've observed amongst our members is in HR and recruitment, and that includes apprentices and trainees, labour hire and recruitment. And much of this is occurring as part of the major infrastructure projects because there's just so much demand for talent through these projects. And also because social procurement includes not just purchasing of goods and services, but it also includes the direct employment of marginalised people. Other high demand areas are the building, trade, repairs and maintenance category, and that includes things like traffic management, waste, security and signage, and also plant supply and landscaping. And again, you can see that these are the sorts of categories that are required on these large scale infrastructure projects. There are also areas of really high demand that are broadly relevant though across all business and government sectors, and where we're seeing that is in cleaning, catering, consumables, training such as first aid, and the graphic design and marketing and comms type services. So there are also some broadly relevant categories where we're seeing less spend, but it is growing. And so this is in things like e-waste, printing services, personal protective equipment, venue hire, business and administrative services, so document destruction and scanning, and staff engagement activities, wellbeing activities, training services, and then also logistics. So that gives you a bit of a flavour of what's happening in the social procurement marketplace from a demand perspective. I'm now going to share with you a social procurement checklist that will help you, if you're from a social enterprise, understand what you need to be optimised for social procurement. And I also welcome Jo to jump in, and give your industry perspective on this as well. So first of all, and Jo has touched on this, demonstrating your capability is really important. And you can do this by showing that you've got a track record in providing your product or service to other businesses. And what this does is it demonstrates that you've got customers, you've got a market, you've got experience and capability to deliver contracts to business and government customers. And you can do this, using customer references and testimonials because it helps reduce buyers' perception of risk when they see that you've done this before and they can see who you've sold to before. If you're a small to medium-sized enterprise, you can demonstrate your capability and experience by highlighting some of your key customers and the type of work you do for them, like really bringing that to life through use cases or case studies. If you're a startup, you can demonstrate your capability by highlighting the founder's past experience and transferable skills that are relevant to the new enterprise. And also really important in demonstrating your capability is showing that you've got really robust governance and a really skilled team. And so this could take many forms. It could be that you've got a board of advisors if you don't have a full board, showing that you've got a diverse team with the skills and the business acumen that's needed to deliver and win and deliver big contracts. Jo, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that around demonstrating capability?
No, I think you've nailed it all, Olivia. It is like, though, going to a job interview and convincing that person why you want to take a risk on bringing you into the organisation. It's always worth thinking of it like this.
Great, thanks, Jo. So secondly, really important to be realistic. So you need to have a good understanding of the minimum and maximum contract sizes that you're able and willing to take on and deliver successfully. And buyers will look at your previous experience and the contract sizes that you've delivered in the past as a good guide. Because, you know, if you take on something too big and you can't deliver it to the required standards because you were over ambitious, it can really limit your future prospects. So you do need to be really realistic about the size of contract that you're able to deliver, because it gives potential buyers an idea of your scale and where you might fit into the tiers of their supply chain. So Joe touched on this earlier. It may be that you're better not to sell to them directly as a tier 1 supplier, but it might be more appropriate that you fit in as a tier 2, tier 3 or tier 4 supplier and subcontract down the chain. And if your organisation is too small to take on certain contracts, you know, consider collaborations with other social enterprises or mainstream suppliers. And I think it might have been Chloe, brought this up earlier. You know, it's not an easy thing to do. These sorts of collaborations take a very long time to develop. You know, having that relationship and trust is critical. And so you can't sort of wait for a tender to be live and then scramble and build a consortium. Suggest that, you know, actually start connecting with other potential partners now, and building that so that you're sort of ready to go when a tender opportunity does become public. Joe, anything from your end on this one?
I don't know if it's related to the first or the second one, but the one thing that's occurred to me is be very specific about what it is that you supply as well. If you go to a procurement person and say, well, I can do anything you want, you just kind of pass the problem over to the procurement person. So it's quite good to say, this is what I do. Like you said, this is what I do. This is the scale I do it. And this is what I'm maybe prepared to kind of go up to, because then what you've done is been really confident about what it is. If you sort of often go to a procurement person and say, oh, I can do all these things, maybe, it sort of creates uncertainty. So this is really critical.
So compliance is critical. And again, Joe has touched on this a little bit. So one part of compliance might be that you're certified with social traders. You know, certification is what gives them the confidence that as a social enterprise, you've been independently verified. With state government in particular, they will only buy from certified social enterprises who are certified with social traders. And it just gives them confidence in directing their procurement spend. They know that it's going to achieve impact. Some of the other types of compliance that's important for social procurement is just making sure you've got the appropriate insurance policies in place, having accreditations or certifications, licenses, memberships, whatever it is that's sort of reasonably required or in some cases expected for your industry or the product or service that you're selling. And also really important to be aware of the regulations that your potential customers need to comply with. So even though they may not directly apply to you, for example, the Modern Slavery Act, they will apply to larger organisations and they will then have expectations that flows down through their suppliers. So really important to do your research on that. You know, have a look what your competitors, not just other social enterprises, but commercial mainstream businesses as well. Have a look what sort of certifications or accreditations they've got, because that might give you a good guide as to sort of what's expected. Joe, you've got some pretty strong thoughts on this area as well, I think.
Yeah, it's really important to keep up with this stuff as well. Don't let any of your certifications expire or your insurances expire, because that kind of can be an example where maybe you just haven't quite got your governance system sorted out. Look, the number of times that I do get approached by organisations claiming to be social enterprises, and as I say, giving 5% of your profit to charity does not a social enterprise make. So actually, if you are genuinely who you are, it's good to differentiate yourselves from all those people out there claiming to be a social enterprise, because that way it gives buyers the confidence that they are, you know, when they're talking about the social procurement impact, that they are genuinely talking about an organisation that is doing that.
Great, thanks, Joe. So marketing and business development, critically important. You know, it's important to be visible, to have a strong online presence. Joe has also touched on this. Again, your website is the first place that buyers will often look. So really important to keep it up to date, keep it professional. If you're certified with Social Traders, you'll have a profile on our online directory, which is called the Social Enterprise Finder. So we have just recently launched a public version of the Social Enterprise Finder, which is so exciting. So this means that certified social enterprises are now able to be found by anyone, anywhere, globally, whereas in the past it was only accessible to our business and government members, but it's part of our work in really helping to grow the social enterprise sector. So we have the public directory is just sort of got light key information about enterprises. We still have a closed version of the directory that's only available to our business and government members, and that contains a lot more comprehensive information about certified social enterprises. So it helps buyers assess capability and fit and things like that. So if you are certified with us, your portal profile or directory profile is a really good marketing tool. And again, just making sure it's always kept up to date and is really targeting that specific audience. If your social enterprise is part of a bigger not-for-profit organisation, we highly recommend that the social enterprise has a separate website, or at least that the social enterprise is really easy to find on the homepage, or that when you do give out your web address, you give out the specific URL to the page of the enterprise, because buyers are really time poor. They'll get really frustrated if they're navigating through a whole lot of NDIS information or whatever else it is you might do. So if you're part of a big not-for-profit, you are likely talking to many different stakeholders, and the language that you will use, the information that you will use will really vary from that in which when you are targeting a business and government customer. So think really carefully about what is that experience of somebody landing on your homepage. Can they find what they need to find really easily? Will it immediately connect with them? Will they get that you're relevant? Because if they have to dig too hard or sort of try and understand why have I landed on this website, they will disengage. A few other things to think about with your website. It's great to feature logos of your customers, logos of any accreditations that you've got. This really adds credibility. And then think about how you articulate your social purpose from the perspective of your customers. And again, I think Jess asked this question earlier. You know, the way that you talk about your impact should really depend on who you're talking to and what's important to them. You know, some enterprises may choose not to market themselves based on their impact. And it really depends, what are those key decision-making drivers for the audience that you're talking to? So it's really about sort of putting your head in your feet in their shoes, and understanding what's important to them and using that as your sort of key messaging. And it's a good idea to research your competitors and their websites and social media channels. So again, not just other enterprises, but Indigenous businesses and mainstream suppliers, and have a look how they talk about themselves, because then you'll see who you're being compared to. Now, regarding business development, it is really important to have dedicated business development expertise within your social enterprise. And this can help you grow through social procurement, because it's what enables you to build strategic relationships, to reach new customers, to work out if you're going to enter into a new market or not. And the key aspects of business development are the ability to think strategically and commercially, while also fostering relationships and rapport. But you know, things move very slowly, so you do need to have a lot of patience. You need to be conscious that it will take time to build that rapport. You need to be very responsive when you're building and realizing new market opportunities. So you do need to factor in long lead times and sort of have really realistic expectations about how long it might take to nurture a relationship. You know, it can take up to 2 years to sort of secure a contract when you first met somebody within that organisation. So just make sure that whoever is in charge of business development has got time and capacity to undertake those relationship nurturing activities that you need when building your sales pipeline. And then finally, it's really important to make sure you've got a well-rehearsed 90-second elevator pitch. So Your pitch should be really clear, concise. It should appeal to the customer's strongest decision-making drivers. So again, that might not be impact, it's probably commercial drivers. So you do need to find a balance when you're pitching to business and government customers between communicating what you sell and your impact. Because from our experience, what buyers the first question that they have in their mind is, do you sell a product or service that I can buy, and do you have the capability to deliver? You know, the impact questions come later, once they know that you satisfy those things. So we suggest, you know, spend about 60 seconds talking about what you sell and demonstrating your capability by talking about your current customers, contracts, you know, that you've delivered in the past, and then sort of less than 30 seconds of your 90 seconds discussing your impact. And when you are pitching, be really clear on your value proposition, and that is, what does your social enterprise have to offer that other competitors don't, or how can your product or service fulfill a need or solve a problem that others can't? Like, really think about what you can offer that's going to benefit the customer. Think about it from their perspective. And just make sure you tailor your pitch every time so that it's relevant to whoever it is you're talking to. And again, buyers are really time poor. They'll disengage if you waffle on or talk about things that aren't directly relevant to them. And finally, you just remember, you know, when you're targeting business and government customers, don't talk about the products or services you might sell for a business to consumer market unless they're relevant to them in a business capacity. Because often enterprises will have a B2B and a B2C arm. So really just stick with those products or services that you sell to businesses and don't mention the other stuff. And just practice your pitch. You know, get feedback from a diverse range of people. You can, as much as you probably cringe, video yourself pitching, watch it back, and because it really is important to make a great first impression. And with the networking events that we run, where we connect social enterprises with business and government buyers, everybody has to do a 90-second pitch to buyers around a table. It's sort of like speed dating, and it is nerve-wracking. So it is really important to sort of have that pitch nailed to have the best chance of connecting. Jo, anything you want to add on that?
Oh, so many amazing tips there, Olivia. There was 4 things that I just wanted to kind of add to with what you just said there. So you mentioned logos on the website. Absolutely. If you can mention who your other customers are, that is really helpful. Just be careful about the logos, though. Make sure you get the permission of the company to use that logo. Some organizations don't want you to use it unless you ask permission. So just try not to fall down that. I have been at presentations where people have put up the Westpac logo because they've had a conversation. And then I sort of see that and think, oh, that's a bit strange. And I know it was an innocent mistake, but be aware that that's just not especially cool for some people. Your website, definitely all of the tips that Olivia mentioned around it being professional, easy to find, not being absorbed in a higher level company's website. When I want to refer organizations on internally, so if you can imagine an organization like Westpac is like a town, we've got tens of thousands of people. I cannot necessarily have conversations with all the people involved in buying. So often I'll be doing it by email, and links to the website are really helpful to me. I can say, this is what they are, this is what they do, and then people will pick that up and browse it. And again, like Olivia says, they're time poor. They'll spend like 30 seconds, so be straight to the point about what it is you do, who you do it to, and what kind of work you've done. Really good examples of those are actually sort of like interior, like construction companies. They often list the projects they've worked in. We can transfer that across to other work. That would be really helpful. And pictures as well. Olivia's dead right on the pitch as well. Same kind of concept. There has been times where I have heard people say, I can help you meet your social procurement targets. That's not a differentiator, because if I'm in a room with social enterprises, there's 5 other people that can also help me do that. So what is it that's unique about your business that would help, that I need? Because I need that information in order to sell you internally as well. I'm not going to just kind of work it out myself. And then just one additional point on the B2C, absolutely acknowledge, try not to get bogged down with your B2C. offering, if that's what you're doing. But also don't forget that sometimes gifting can be a big thing internally. So I do have an internal page within Westpac that talks about organisations that have gifts. And I do list those on there because I do, even though I'm looking for B2C and it'd be nice to have those big contracts, there are still people out there that want to buy gifts for people in their teams, even personally as well. So there is that opportunity. If you do stuff that comes under that gifting thing, then don't be frightened to mention it at the side, but also say, but I can do, this thing on scale for you. Thanks, Olivia.
Great, thanks, Jo. And then finally in the checklist, stay informed and actively network. So, identify potential customers and research their procurement processes. Sometimes you might be able to see that they use a particular procurement platform, particularly with government and the infrastructure projects. So make sure you register on those procurement platforms. And it might mean that you have to register on 10 different procurement platforms, but it's just part of that particular process. Again, with government, you can sign up for tender notification emails. So have a look at that. LinkedIn, again, I think Jo touched on it earlier. It's an incredible tool to find and contact relevant people. And it might be procurement people, but it might also be people in HR or people in marketing, people in the sustainability team. So just have a think about what is it that you're selling and who is your customer. It won't necessarily always be the procurement team. It might be you're selling something that actually executive assistants or office managers are buying. So, you can use LinkedIn to search by job title and find people that way. And if you're Social Trader certified, we run regular networking events. It's been a lot harder during COVID, but we have done virtual networking events, not as good as in person, but they're better than nothing. And that's where, social enterprises have the opportunity to meet and pitch to business and government members. So just finally, it is a really good idea to have a range of information that's prepared and ready to go so that when opportunities do arise, you can really hit the ground running. So just making sure you've got really clear description on your product or service and your pricing, a description of your organisation and its work, and selling yourself and your key strengths. Referees, such as your current and previous customers, and permission from them to use them. Copies of your membership certificates, licenses, accreditations. You might be asked to provide evidence, so certificates, and as Jo touched on, make sure everything is up to date. Again, same for insurance information. Being able to talk about your contract capability and track record. So you might like to get some of your past contracts written up as case studies or examples of the sort of work that you do. Really important to have good descriptions of your team capability and their experience. You will often be asked to submit CVs of key staff, but just having some of those summaries written up. Case studies, and that can include your stories of impact. So, if you can have a variety of case studies, some that just demonstrate the type of work you do, the customers you've worked for, some that also incorporate the impact that's been achieved, and others that will be just impact. So really good to have a mixture of things ready to go. Impact measurements and evidence of outcomes. Really important that you can talk about that and help buyers understand that when they spend with you, what does that translate to in terms of impact for every dollar spent? And your 90-second elevator pitch. So if you have all of these things ready to go, you'll be in a really strong position to start taking advantage of social procurement opportunities. And that's it from me. So Social Traders is always here to help. So please reach out. If you're not certified with us, drop me an email and I'll connect you to our certification team. Or if there's anything else that you want to know, reach out and I'll, if I can't answer it myself, I'll connect you with the relevant colleague within Social Traders. And I'll take questions now as well. I think there are a couple of things in the chat. Are they?
I think we've covered those ones, Olivia. If anyone has a
Okay.
question, just to unmute and jump in and we can tackle those.
There are a couple of questions that have come here. So one of them is, would organisations appreciate social impact identifiers included on capability statements submitted with tenders and/or EOIs? Stacey, can you clarify, what do you mean by social impact identifiers?
Sorry.
That's all right.
I guess our impact results, so that the type of individuals that we're supporting, basically the percentage that goes back to the social procurement.
So look, so on a capability statement, they will largely be looking for demonstration of your capability. So I'd say that the impact information is probably less relevant to put on a capability statement. However, in a tender or an EOI, there could be an opportunity to talk about your impact. So in some examples, there might be evaluation criteria that is specifically around demonstrating what sort of impact you might be achieving, and that's absolutely where you would put it in. If a tender doesn't have any evaluation criteria remotely connected to anything social impact, they could have something around innovation. How is your organisation innovating? And it might be that you sort of put it in there. So I guess it's about sort of, being very clear on what is the purpose of this question? What are they looking for? And not putting it in everywhere, really making sure that it's going into those places where people have asked for it to go in. Does that make sense, Stacey? Does that answer the question?
Yeah,
Great.
absolutely. Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions?
I've got an observation, a question, probably to both of you. Olivia, you mentioned there's like 36% of social procurement is the trend in that construction and infrastructure space. And I think you were saying that's been driven by government legislation around that social procurement piece. Are you, either of you, seeing other signs of legislative change in the pipeline? And kind of linked to that, if you are, I'm interested to hear, we hear a lot from government around pushing innovation and encouraging the startup and the social enterprise ecosystem. Are you seeing organizations like enterprise and businesses being more open to doing pilots to try like new business models with social enterprises as well, as a way of kind of fostering the growth in that space?
Let me just unpack the first part of the question. So around, what you asked is are you seeing government policy impacting social procurement spend outside of infrastructure? Well, generally, the way, for example, the Victorian government social procurement framework works is that the social procurement mandates kick in when certain spend thresholds are achieved. And that's why the infrastructure projects are where it's at, because they're all, sort of $50 million plus projects. So the greater the spend, the more they have to do social procurement. So there's sort of a sliding scale, and that's why we're seeing the most impact occurring in those large scale projects, because the mandates are very strong. So it's not to say it's not happening in other parts of government. It is, but it's not, the impetus for them to do it isn't as strong, like targets aren't mandatory, etc. So it's happening, but it's happening a little more slowly. And what's been really interesting is that the commercial construction companies that are bidding for these large government jobs, they're very competitive. They want to win the next big contract. They've realised that social procurement's here to stay. It's written into the contracts, and they've seen the competitive advantage they can get from it. But they've also started to see the impact it's having on their staff, when their staff realise, oh wow, we're actually achieving impact as well as doing our normal job, etc. And it's there, the organisations that have been doing this for a few years now are starting to build it in a sort of business as usual, which is wonderful. So we're not seeing that same level of commitment and innovation in other areas. That there's absolutely a correlation between strong government policy and mandates and impact occurring. But it is occurring in those other areas more slowly. But I think, like anything, it will trickle down across all levels and outside of government mandates as well. And we are seeing it happening outside of government mandate. It's just kind of being dominated by these infrastructure projects. And then Rob, there was a second part of your question. Can you just repeat that for me, please?
I just thought the checklist you're going for, like just highlighting absolutely there's a need for compliance, making sure you understand, being realistic. And I was just wondering with like, as the ecosystem's evolving and mindsets are changing, are you seeing the larger organizations who are procuring from social enterprises being more open to, rather than going into a contract saying, look, you've got a really innovative business or a startup or a new business model, we'd actually like to do a pilot with you because we think this is really interesting, as opposed to, you know, you can either contract with us or you're not suitable to. Are you starting to see kind of a mindset change of people being able to?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, piloting is a wonderful way to sort of de-risk it for a buyer. So where buyers are prepared to sort of carve off smaller pieces of work, it does often lead to growth for that enterprise, because, you know, you can demonstrate that you can deliver, you can build that trust, and then over time we have seen contracts grow significantly with particular enterprises. What we've also seen the odd example where it's the level crossing removal comes to mind with their work with refugee migrant talent and a new piece of technology that they developed. The level crossing removal project in Victoria, it's a major rail infrastructure project. They're mandated to do social procurement, but they sort of went against everything we'd heard in terms of you must have a track record, you must have done this before. And they met refugee migrant talent, a fairly young social enterprise that does what the name implies, connects refugee and migrants with employment opportunities. They took quite a punt on them and realised that, you know, one of the founders came from a very strong tech background and had really incredible tech innovation capability. And together they actually developed this new technology platform called WaveXD, which is sort of like an aggregator of anybody that's doing diverse employment can actually use this piece of technology, so that when somebody like a large government agency like Level Crossing wants to find diverse candidates for roles, they can go onto this piece of technology and actually see candidates not just from one social enterprise but from a range of enterprises and other sources. And that was a brand new service that was developed with a government agency that took a bit of a risk, which is, you know, hugely exciting when you see that level of innovation and risk occurring. So it is happening out there. I don't have heaps of other examples to share, unfortunately, but I think the more that this sort of stuff gets out in the market, the more comfortable others will be. But Jo, it sounds like you might have an example to share.
Thanks, Olivia.
Look, yeah, absolutely. I think that the thing about pilots are, you're likely to get pilots with large organizations when you're trying to solve a problem that, when you're innovative or trying to solve a problem that they have. For example, we did enter a pilot with Green Collect around diversion of our waste. And what that has done is we didn't have people out there that were dealing with hard to recycle items. So we entered a pilot with them and proved that it's just a lot easier when it's something very unique than if it is somebody coming along and doing something that is almost a commodity product or services. So just think about the uniqueness of what it is you do, and you're more likely to get in with large corporates and have a pilot than if it's something that everybody else does.
Wonderful. Look, thank you both so much. I know we're on time and people have other meetings to go to, so I just want to wrap us up there. Thank you again, Joanne and Olivia, for an amazing session. I've certainly learned a lot and hope everyone on the call has got something out of this. Thank you again for joining. If you do have 60 seconds to quickly help us with our feedback survey, that would be much appreciated. It just helps us to understand how we can help the sector more broadly and bring more sessions like this to you. I will leave it there and wish you all a wonderful afternoon and have a great weekend. Thank you everyone for your time. Really appreciate it.
This is great.